The city of Accra was alive, its streets bustling with life as twilight descended. The hum of car engines blended with laughter spilling out from open-air bars and the rhythmic beats of high-life music playing from roadside speakers. Neon lights flickered, casting a colorful glow over OSU's Oxford Street, where the night promised opportunities for those who dared to seize them. Cobby Flex stood at his usual spot, leaning casually against a black Mercedes-Benz that wasn't his. His crisp white shirt hugged his lean, athletic frame, and his gold wristwatch sparkled under the streetlights. His perfectly groomed appearance was no accident. He understood the power of image. Across the street, vendors called out to passing customers, selling roasted plantains, kebabs, and cold drinks. But Cobby's focus wasn't on the street food or the crowd. He was waiting for a notification. His phone buzzed, and a sly smile played on his lips as he glanced at the screen. Mrs. Mensa, room 302. Don't keep me waiting. Cobby slid the phone into his pocket, his confidence growing. He had met Mrs. Adwoa Mensa at an exclusive party weeks ago, where he'd charmed her with his wit and smooth dance moves. He knew exactly how to play his cards, flattering her, making her feel young and desired in a way her husband no longer did. This is just the beginning, he thought, adjusting his shirt. His charm and looks had opened doors to a lifestyle he never imagined growing up in a crowded single-room compound in Tima. While his peers struggled to make ends meet, Cobby was being driven in luxury cars, dining at the finest restaurants, and pocketing wads of cash from wealthy women who desired his company. But deep down, a tiny voice whispered warnings he tried to ignore. He silenced it with thoughts of the life he wanted: the luxury apartment, the designer clothes, the respect that money could buy. As Cobby walked toward the grand hotel that loomed over the bustling street, he passed a group of young men sitting on a curb, laughing and eating roasted yam. Their clothes were worn but clean, and their faces glowed with contentment. For a moment, Cobby wondered if they judged him as he passed, but he quickly dismissed the thought. They'll never understand the hustle, he muttered under his breath, quickening his pace. The hotel lobby was a different world altogether. Cool air conditioning replaced the sticky heat outside, and the scent of expensive cologne and polished wood lingered in the air. Cobby walked confidently past the receptionist, who gave him a brief, knowing glance. When he reached the elevator, he took out his phone to check the details again. Room 302. He grinned. This wasn't his first time, but tonight felt special. Mrs. Mensah had promised something big, a gift that would change his life. As the elevator doors closed, Cobby caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished steel. He saw the face of a man in control, someone who knew how to play the game and win. But in the shadows of his confidence, a faint unease lingered. He brushed it aside as the elevator dinged, signaling his arrival on the third floor. Let the games begin, he whispered to himself as he stepped out. The hotel suite was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the sparkling Accra skyline, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. A crystal chandelier hung low over a sleek glass dining table set for two, while the air carried the faint aroma of lavender from scented candles strategically placed around the room. Cobby stepped inside, immediately absorbing the luxury that surrounded him. His well-practiced smile broadened as Mrs. Adwoa Mensa, draped in an emerald green silk gown, turned to greet him. Her elegance was undeniable. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had everything. Cobby, she purred, holding a champagne flute in her hand. You never disappoint. Always on time, always looking sharp. For you, Adwoa, I wouldn't dare keep you waiting, Cobby replied, flashing the charming smile that had become his signature. She laughed softly and gestured for him to sit. Champagne. Of course, he said, taking a seat on the plush sofa. Mrs. Mensa poured the golden liquid into a glass and handed it to him. To us, she said, raising her flute. To us, Cobby echoed, clinking his glass against hers. The two settled into easy conversation, though Cobby knew how to navigate these encounters. He complimented her on everything from her flawless skin to her exquisite taste in decor. She, in turn, reveled in the attention, her laughter growing lighter with every word he spoke. But as the evening progressed, something felt off. Mrs. Mensa's phone, which she had placed on the coffee table, began buzzing intermittently. She ignored it at first, silencing the vibration with a swipe of her manicured finger. But as the notifications kept coming, her demeanor shifted. You seem distracted, Cobby said, feigning concern but keeping his tone light. Adwoa waved a hand dismissively. It's nothing, just some business matters. They can wait. Cobby nodded, but his sharp instincts caught the unease in her eyes. He had been in this game long enough to know when a storm was brewing. Still, he decided to play it cool. Well, if business is what's bothering you, then let's toast to forgetting it, at least for tonight, Kabi said, raising his glass again. Adwoa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She hesitated for a moment before taking another sip. Kabi leaned back, trying to relax, but the buzzing of her phone had put him on edge. Something wasn't right, and his instincts told him to tread carefully. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the elegant yet impersonal decor. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect, almost like a stage set for a drama yet to unfold. Adwoa's phone buzzed again, and this time, she glanced at it with a flicker of alarm before quickly putting it face down. "Adwoa," Kabi said softly, his voice lowering. "You can tell me if something's wrong." She looked at him, her expression torn. "It's really nothing, Kabi. Just people who don't know when to stop calling." "Are you sure?" he asked, leaning forward slightly, his tone as smooth as silk. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but she stopped herself. Instead, she stood up, brushing imaginary dust from her gown. "I think we need more champagne," she said quickly, walking over to the bar cart. Kabi watched her closely. Her movements were graceful but hurried, her hand trembling slightly as she uncorked a fresh bottle. His mind raced. Was it her husband? A jealous friend? Or perhaps someone who knew about their arrangement? Whatever it was, he could feel the tension thickening like a dark cloud settling over the room. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Not the polite, gentle knock of room service, but a loud, deliberate pounding that echoed through the suite. Adwoa froze, the bottle of champagne slipping slightly in her grasp. She turned to Kabi, her eyes wide with fear. "Are you expecting someone?" Kabi asked, his voice calm but his heart hammering in his chest. She shook her head slowly, her face pale. No, I'm not." Before either of them could move, the pounding came again, louder this time, more insistent. Kabi stood up, every muscle in his body tensing as the sense of danger grew. "Adwoa," he whispered urgently, "who is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her phone and began typing frantically, her hands shaking. Kabi glanced toward the door, then back at her. Whatever was on the other side of that door, he had a feeling it wasn't friendly. And for the first time that night, he wondered if this game he had been playing for years was finally about to catch up with him. The pounding on the door grew louder, more aggressive, echoing through the luxurious suite like a warning bell. Kabi's pulse quickened as he moved toward the door instinctively, but Adwoa grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Don't," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. Kabi stopped, his eyes darting between her pale, panicked face and the door. His chest tightened as the realization dawned. Whoever was outside wasn't there by accident. "Adwoa," he said through gritted teeth, keeping his voice low. "What is going on?" Before she could respond, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Kabi stumbled back as two towering men in dark suits stormed into the room, their faces set in grim determination. Behind them entered a man Kabi immediately recognized. Kweku Mensa. The name alone was enough to strike fear into anyone in Accra. A billionaire with connections in politics, business, and beyond, Kweku was a man who demanded respect and loyalty. His presence dominated the room as he strode in, his tailored suit impeccable, his expression cold and calculating. Adwoa froze, her fear evident. "Kweku," she stammered, clutching the edge of the sofa for support. What are you doing here?" Kweku's dark eyes scanned the room before landing on Kabi, who felt rooted to the spot. His confident facade shattered under the weight of the man's piercing gaze. "So," Kweku said, his deep voice filling the room. "This is the boy." He took a step closer, his polished shoes silent on the plush carpet. "The one who thought he could toy with my wife. And with me?" Kabi opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind raced, searching for an explanation, an excuse, anything that could defuse the situation. "Leave him out of this, Kweku," Adwoa said, stepping forward in a desperate attempt to shield Kabi. "This isn't about him." Kweku cut her off with a sharp glare. "Oh, but it is. You think you can embarrass me? In my own city. You think I won't find out?" He turned back to Kabi, his expression hardening. "Do you even know who I am, boy?" Kabi swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Mr. Mensa, I didn't know." "Save it," Kweku snapped, raising a hand to silence him. "You didn't know? Or you didn't care?" He motioned to his bodyguards, who immediately stepped toward Kabi. Panic surged through Kabi as he backed away, his heart pounding. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "I swear I'll disappear. You'll never see me again." Kweku smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you'll disappear, all right. But not on your terms." One of the guards reached for Kabi, but he reacted instinctively, shoving the man's arm away and darting toward the balcony. The guard lunged after him, but Kabi was quicker, adrenaline fueling his movements. In one desperate motion, he climbed over the balcony railing and looked down. The drop was dizzying, 3 stories to the ground below. His palms were slick with sweat as he clung to the edge, his mind racing. The guard shouted behind him, and he knew he had no choice. Taking a deep breath, he let go. Kabi hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his legs as he stumbled to his feet. He didn't stop to assess the damage, he couldn't. The shouts from above spurred him on as he took off running. The hotel's back alley was dark and narrow, littered with trash and broken bottles. Kabi weaved through it, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. His mind was a blur of fear and regret. He could hear voices behind him. Kweku's guards weren't far behind. The pounding of their footsteps echoed in his ears, urging him to move faster despite the pain in his legs. He darted out of the alley and into the busy streets of Accra. The nightlife that had once seemed vibrant and inviting now felt suffocating. People barely noticed him as he pushed through the crowds, his disheveled appearance blending with the chaos. His thoughts raced. Where could he go? Who could he trust? He couldn't go back to his usual spots. Kweku would find him. He needed to disappear, but in a city as interconnected as Accra, that was easier said than done. Eventually, he found himself in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. He ducked into an abandoned building, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The darkness enveloped him, offering a fragile sense of safety. For hours, Kabi sat in silence, his mind replaying the events of the night. He had always known his lifestyle was risky, but he had never imagined it would spiral so far out of control. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the broken windows, Kabi knew one thing for certain. He couldn't go back to the life he had been living. This was the price of his choices, and it was a price he could no longer afford to pay. The morning sun cast its first light over Accra, painting the city in muted hues of gold and gray. Kabi remained crouched in the corner of the abandoned building, his mind replaying the events of the night before. His body ached from the fall, his legs throbbing, and his hands were raw from scraping against the rough pavement. The once confident man who had strolled into luxury suites was now reduced to a fugitive, hiding in the shadows. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Cracked but still functional, the device held messages from other women, potential clients who once promised him wealth and comfort. But after last night, all of it felt empty. Each notification now seemed like a trap waiting to spring. He switched off the phone and dropped it beside him. Kabi couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed to figure out his next move. But where could he go? Kweku Mensah's reach extended far beyond Accra. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside. Instinctively, he pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering. He peeked through a gap in the door, relief washing over him when he saw it was just a group of kids kicking around a battered football. Their laughter was carefree, echoing in the quiet morning air. For a moment, Kabi envied them. They had no idea how cruel the world could be. He sighed and stood up, his legs shaking as he walked toward the exit. He couldn't hide forever. If he was going to survive, he needed a plan, and that plan started with leaving the city. By midday, Kabi had found his way to Tima, a quieter city along the coast where he hoped to stay under the radar. He avoided the main roads and kept his head down, relying on street smarts to blend in. With no money in his pocket and no connections to call upon, Kabi was forced to face a harsh reality. The life of luxury he had once enjoyed was gone, and so was the safety net he thought he had built. Desperation led him to a small mechanic shop near the harbor. The shop owner, an older man named Uncle Joe, watched skeptically as Kabi approached, his designer shirt now torn and dirty. "What can I do for you?" Uncle Joe asked, wiping grease from his hands. Kabi hesitated. He had never begged for help before. It wasn't in his nature. But the events of the past night had stripped him of his pride. "I need work," Kabi said, his voice low. "I'll do anything. Just give me a chance." Uncle Joe raised an eyebrow. "You don't look like someone who's used to hard work." "I'm not," Kabi admitted, meeting the older man's gaze. "But I need to change. Please." Uncle Joe studied him for a long moment before nodding. "All right, grab that wrench. Let's see if you're serious." Kabi nodded, relief washing over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something honest, something real. Meanwhile, across town, Mrs. Adwoa Mensa sat in the lavish living room of her mansion. The air was heavy with tension as Kweku's lawyers finalized the paperwork for their divorce. Adwoa's world had crumbled overnight. Kweku had stripped her of everything: her wealth, her status, and her reputation. The story of her affair had spread like wildfire, whispered in high-class social circles and reported in tabloids. She stared at the divorce papers, her hands trembling. What had she gained from her fleeting escapades with young men like Kabi? A few moments of excitement had cost her everything she had spent decades building. As Kweku left the house for the final time, Adwoa was left to confront her reflection. For the first time, she saw not the glamorous, confident woman she had presented to the world, but a broken soul searching for fulfillment in all the wrong places. Months passed, and Kabi's life began to take shape. The work at Uncle Joe's garage was hard and unglamorous, but it was honest. Slowly, Kabi learned the value of earning his way, one repaired car at a time. One evening, after a long day of work, Kabi sat on a bench outside the shop, watching the sunset. The warm hues painted the sky, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. He thought about the choices he had made, the people he had hurt, and the danger he had faced. It hadn't been easy, but the experience had taught him a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Shortcuts in life often lead to dead ends. Kabi vowed to rebuild his life on a foundation of integrity and hard work. Adwoa, too, found a new purpose. After losing everything, she began volunteering at a women's shelter, using her story as a cautionary tale for others. One day, as she prepared to give a talk, she received an unexpected message from an unknown number. It was Kabi. "Thank you," the message read, "for showing me the path I needed to take, even if it came through pain. I hope you found peace too." Adwoa smiled faintly, replying simply, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them. Stay on the right path." For the young men, chasing easy money through deceit and shortcuts leads to ruin. Building an honest life, though slow, is the only way to lasting success. For the married, wealthy women, seeking fulfillment outside of integrity can destroy everything you hold dear. True happiness begins with self-reflection and respect for others. The shadows of temptation are strong, but the light of redemption shines brighter. Both Kabi and Adwoa learned this, though the cost was high. Proverbs 11 verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Verse 6. The righteousness of the upright delivers them, but the unfaithful are trapped by evil desires.